The recognizing of the diversity of our gifts was clearly an important part of the Primitive Methodist tradition, right from the very beginnings of the movement. And it's for that reason that we've asked Julie to tell us something about how the British Methodist Church is engaging today in issues of EDI, equality, diversity, and inclusion, but particularly in terms of racial justice and the important emphasis that we should have within the life of our church. So it's with great pleasure that I invite Julie, who is our district, Chester and Stoke district EDI officer, to share something of our present engagement with such issues. Thank you, Julie.
Well, good morning, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here this morning. I'm an unexpected guest, but it's a pleasure to join you. And I know over the coming sessions you will focus down on particular stories that resonate with Primitive Methodism, but in a way, addressing the question of what have we learned, I thought it would be good for us this morning just to draw back a little bit and to look at a big picture. And as we do that this morning, I'm hoping this will break into spontaneous discussion later on. That's my fervent hope. I'm just letting you know that now. Where are we and what have we learned? We don't operate in isolation, do we, from the things that happen around us? And so I want to just begin by having a little dance through a Methodist timeline. We'll do it quite briefly because timelines are sometimes a bit boring, aren't they? But as we do, you know, I'm mindful myself of the things that have happened within society, the things that we have become aware of that have made the news, some of them which haven't made the news during this time. And we'll draw all of this stuff back to the Methodist Church's strategy on inclusive church, because we are hearing now lots of stuff about inclusive church strategy. And we'll come back to that in terms of how that strategy, you know, what have we learned? What's in that, which is for us at this time? We've seen a lot in the media about the Windrush generation, haven't we, over the recent months, many months now, going back to 1948, Caribbean immigrants to British shores. And that goes on until 1973-ish, something like that. And then in 1962, the Committee for the Care of Immigrants at the Home Mission Department expresses concern to the Methodist Conference about the emergence of what it describes as colour prejudice. 1962. You're almost in my lifetime. Not quite. By 1971, the conference is asked to consider a notice of motion which came from the Community and Race Relations Committee, which describes, amongst many other things, that division between black and white in British churches as being, I think it describes it something like, on the brink of heresy. In those early 70s, and urging the Methodist people to turn away from such an understanding of Christian discipleship. The Methodist Church, of course, has a long history of being an advocate for social justice and for challenging injustice. We know that in all sorts of ways, not just in relation to ethnicity. You know, the ordination of women, and lots of other things, lots of stuff. But the work on racial justice first came to the Methodist Conference in 1962. 1962, long before the government's introduction of the Race Relations Act in 1976. Long time before. And underpinning all of that work, the belief that we are altered in the image of God. over the past, well, over my lifetime, 40, 50 years, the Methodist Church, the face of the Methodist Church in Britain has changed quite dramatically, for the good and for the not so good. Its diversity for sure has increased, and I guess that would depend a lot of the time on where you are geographically as to how diverse that might be. Back in 1985, the Ethnic Minorities in Methodism Working Group, who knew there was such a group? But that group of people published a report, which you can still get, I think, in some places, called A Tree God Planted. And that work set out to sketch the experiences and reflect the experiences of Black people within Methodism. 1993, of course, Stephen Lawrence, in a racially motivated attack, was murdered while he waited at a bus stop. And this always surprises me, only in 1995 did Methodist standing orders. Don't you just love the standing orders? Yay for the standing orders. In 1995, the standing order 13B was introduced, which said the Methodist Church believes that racism is a denial of the gospel. It sort of feels as if it took us a long time to get to writing that down somehow. I always find that curious. Coming to 2000, of course, Inderjit Bogar was elected president of the Methodist Conference, to date the first and the only president from a Black, Asian or minority ethnic background. Well, EDI has become, somebody said to me, EDI has become the thing which is on our agenda. It's turned into safeguarding. And it makes me want to cringe a bit, really. Because I believe with everything I've got that EDI should not be an agenda an item on our agenda, but should be underpinning everything that we do. And so you come to this year and you find the Black Lives Matter movement, which has come to life in a new way. Somebody was saying in another forum the other day that they'd heard Methodist people saying they were surprised by the killing of George Floyd earlier this year. And this lady said to me, I don't know why she said she was surprised. It's happening all the time. It's happening all around us. And then there's the Methodist inclusive church stuff. All of that is part of our background, and so much more. We're just sketching things out now, aren't we? And at the heart of decisions in connection, I'm sure, and some people have said to me in the past few weeks since I took up this job, you know, I didn't realise that when you take this job up, loads of people will ring you and complain about stuff. Oh, great! Because I was missing a bit of that. And so people ring me up and complain all the time. And lots of people saying, you know, the Methodist Church from on high, we're really good at writing reports and commissioning reports and stuff. And we write ourselves a good report and then we put it away somewhere. We think, oh, that was a splendid report. It looked lovely. And then nobody ever refers to it again. And we think we've done something, but we haven't done something. But it's easy to be cynical, isn't it, about the steps that, you know, subsequent leaders have tried to take this work forward. At the heart of all that work, and the acknowledgement that racism is, in fact, a denial of the gospel. So there's been a draft set of principles drawn up on inclusive church. Now, this doesn't apply just to matters of ethnicity and race, but But they are quite interesting. 4 things now which the Methodist Church wants us to think about as inclusive church. An inclusive church is one which welcomes in safety all who want to be part of the church and to know more of the love of God. That seems fairly reasonable. As an inclusive church, that's what we should be doing. Secondly, an inclusive church is one which upholds the discipline of the Methodist Church in the face of discrimination, resisting discrimination. I don't know, I'm interested what you think. I'm not sure that we're that good at that, but we'll come back to it. Thirdly, an inclusive church is one which celebrates diversity in the variety of God's creation. And fourthly, it represents that diversity in its life together. Now, those are 4 sort of overarching principles. But I want to suggest, I think, and not in a cynical way, but just in a truthful way, that at least 2 of those we might be struggling with. And often we don't acknowledge that. So just in terms of that timeline and where we've come, that has been our journey over my lifetime, which I sort of selected at random when Ruth asked me to, you know, how far back shall we go? And all of that sounds good. Those 4 guiding principles sound good, don't they? But I just want to put across that 1 or 2 stories in the light of that timeline before we chat together. I was born in 1965 in Wigan. We all have our problems. And I belonged at that time to a white working class Methodist chapel, where in around about 1975, I think it was, a black preacher was invited to come and preach in that chapel following some kind of exchange which had taken place with the church in Nigeria. I can't remember exactly where. I was only a babe. But what I do remember, interestingly, which has never ever left me, was that when that invitation was mooted with the congregation, a group of ladies on the church council put in an official objection to that invitation. And their objection was on 2 fronts. They said, first of all, that this man who was supposed to come, well, at least he was a man, that this man might offend some of the more sensitive members of that congregation because he was really, and I so clearly remember this, he was really very black. Shades of black, extraordinary. That was the first thing. And the second thing they said, which I found almost more offensive, was that he could not possibly have the same kind of biblical literacy as the white folk. I mean, friends, given the state of biblical literacy in British Methodism, which I don't frankly rate as very high, you know, I don't know what you think. I don't think we're doing great on biblical literacy. It makes it doubly ironic to me, to be honest. Making assumptions about other people based on colour, and in this case on shades of black. That's my first sort of memory from being a youngster. That man was uninvited or disinvited, or whatever's the right word, to keep the peace in that place. And that's where challenging it, there was no challenge to it whatsoever. To keep the peace in that place, he was uninvited, and it went unchallenged. In the late 80s, when I was in university, in the happy days of our student MEthSoc, the Methodist Society welcomed a student from Ghana who was himself a Methodist, who said he would only come to that group of students because he said, whilst the little Methodist chapel in Bangor, of which I was very fond, was on the face of things welcoming to him, he did not feel embraced by that congregation. The difference between being welcomed and being embraced. He said, there are words, but there's no relationship, and I do not feel I can be myself in that place. It's a story which is repeated time and time again. Very recently, having discussions with some of my colleagues, some of my ordained colleagues, about the thorny issue of stationing, for example. Well, actually, I think the best match for us might have been so-and-so, but she's black. So we cannot list that, because they will make her life a misery. Those are things which, you know, you start when I was born and you think, well, they're things that are a long time ago, but actually they're not. They're things which are, you know, what have we learned? Have we learned anything at all? On the Methodist webinar in the summer, which they was held about race and mission, racism and mission. There was the story of a local preacher somebody else was telling, who turned up to lead worship somewhere, and the vestry steward, this is a very recent thing, the vestry steward said to her, "Where are you from?" And she said, "Rugby." And there was a little minute silence, and then he said to her, "No, but really, where are you from?" And she said, "I found it, on the back of that, I found it very, very difficult to go out there and lead worship." And lastly, just a little story which is so recent. When the Black Lives Matter movement around here where I am did not really take off for various reasons. This is a very, very white area. And one of the congregation members in one of the churches I used to be connected with said to me one day, "Do you know, I'm sick of all these banners and these placards that people are making saying Black Lives Matter." She said, "I think I might put one up outside my house saying White Lives Matter." This is a member of the Methodist Church. And I said to her, but you wouldn't need to do that, would you? Because the police are not going to pull you over for driving a car that looks a bit too good for you. And she got really exasperated, and she said, "Well, no, but then I'm not black." And I was about to lose my rag altogether when she said, "Do you know, these people just expect to..."
Has Julie frozen for everybody? Oh, are you back, Julie?
Oh, did you get me? Where did you get me up to, Ruth?
Sorry, we got you up to her exasperation.
Oh yeah. Yes.
And then you got
no, she clearly didn't understand. You know, I'm not black. So she was looking at me like I was stupid or something. And then she said, I'm really sorry," she said. "I don't mean to upset anybody, but I think these people just expect too much." And that stuff is still going on within Methodism. It's not Methodist, obviously, but something has happened. And many stories have been shared, you know, across the summer in various online forums and platforms. And we'll not get to the bottom of it all before 12 o'clock. And, you know, as we're telling these stories, I'm aware that it's really easy for me to say, well, I'm horrified by that. It's much more difficult to say, but hang on a minute, what's my part in this? In what way have I contributed to this? It's much harder to ask that question, to stop and look at ourselves and say, you know, where have I been complicit in this? I know there are places around the connection where racial diversity is being celebrated, and a really nice lady this week came onto one of our groups and was saying that in Wesley's Chapel they make a policy of displaying the regularly share together in international lunches with sort of full national dress and food from all over the world. Have I gone?
Sorry, you froze again, just as you were about to say, Wesley's Chapel, they make a policy of...
No, you'll never know what it was.
Flags. Was it flags, Julie?
Yes, it was flags, yeah. So they display those flags from nationalities that are represented within their membership, with international lunches, with full dress and food from all over the place, and worship celebrated in different languages, in prayer and in song. That sounds amazing to me. That's not happening around here. I mean, I'll just share that with you. That's not happening around here. I would guess, and I am not an expert in this, you know, having been the EDI officer for just a month, I don't claim any great expertise, but I would guess that Wesley's Chapel might be in the minority if you looked at Methodism as a whole. So the inclusive church stuff, to just bring us up to date, recommends all sorts of systemic and cultural changes which are required within Methodism. And there are all sorts of elements to that, which all sound really great. But I'm wondering if we've learned anything underneath. I'm wondering if those sort of steps will touch the people in the pews. The changing face of society. Anti-Semitism and on Islamophobia, you know, widening that scope. So I kind of invite you into a conversation, really. And can I just say one or two things? Somebody said to me this week after we were on a different meeting, so what's the problem then? What's gone wrong? What have we learned? What have we still to learn? I think one or two things, and then we're going to have a discussion about it, if that's all right. I think we have to recognise our own bias, even when we don't think we have it. And I don't think I have it. You know, I want to be the person who's horrified by everybody else's bias. But I joined another group, and they did a quiz at the start of this group, and it just shows, even in general knowledge, how sometimes we're biased. They ran this quiz and they said, you folks probably know this. They were asking things like, what was the name of the pioneer nurse who served alongside Florence Nightingale? Jane knows.
Mary Seacombe.
Seacole.
Yeah, Mary Seacole.
Yeah, and I was like, oh, I think I probably know that. I know Florence Nightingale, but this British Jamaican woman, I just couldn't call her to mind at all. And then a lady said, oh, it's like, so here's another one. Ignatius Sancho, who I've never heard of, was famous for being a writer and composer and a poet, but was also famous for being what? Something else. And I was a bit, oh, I don't know, I'm feeling the stress of this quiz. And the answer apparently is the first known black voter. Who knew? Sometimes, you know, we are biased and we don't know it. And this district, and you know, you're really welcome to join in with that, has now said that we will do some training on that, on our own unconscious bias. That's the first thing. I think we need to do some work for ourselves on the white privilege stuff. So recognising the past, even the bits we don't really want to face up to, recognising our own ethnicity. We think we have no ethnicity, but we do. Recognising that, who holds the power, who is dominant, and that, you know, in so many ways that applies in the church anyway, doesn't it? But in this context particularly. So recognising our bias, doing some work on white privilege, and reflecting theologically. What about the Bible? I think I said earlier on that I believe the truth is that largely, I'm not speaking about particular individuals, we have stopped engaging deeply with the Bible. What do the encounters that Jesus has with people have to say about inclusivity? What about the ways in which we've used the Bible over a long time to justify discrimination and oppression? So they're just some initial thoughts. As I say, we can't really resolve it before 12 o'clock, but I invite you into the conversation. What have we learned? Ruth said to me, oh, there'll be time for people to ask questions. Well, you may be, you know, as I say, you may be wasting your time asking me questions, but sharing together in conversation. So what have we learned?